Her shoes were 2 sizes too small. Her smile was a size too big, and her bank account was a flat-lining tragedy. For Amelia Rossi, a waitress at one of New York's most exclusive restaurants every day, was a performance. But one rainy Tuesday, her audience was different. He was a man who didn't look at the menu. He looked at her and asked a question that hung in the air like smoke. "Tell me, what is it you want more than anything else in this world?" A bitter, exhausted laugh escaped her lips. Honestly, a day off. She thought that was the end of it. She was wrong. The next morning, a black envelope slid under her door. Inside, no words, just a cold, heavy, limitless American Express Centurion card. Her day off had arrived, but it would cost her more than just time. The air in Le Cirque was thick with the scent of money and truffle oil. It was a rarefied atmosphere, one that Amelia Rossi breathed in nightly, but could never truly process. For the patrons who glided across the plush carpets, this was a Tuesday. For Amelia, it was the 14th consecutive day of a double shift, a grueling marathon of balancing impossibly heavy trays, deciphering hushed French orders, and performing the delicate dance of being visible, but invisible. Her feet throbbed a dull, relentless ache that had become as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. The black loafers mandated by the restaurant's draconian dress code were a cruel joke, a $20 purchase from a discount store that felt like a medieval torture device by hour 10. She could feel a blister forming on her left heel, a fiery punctuation mark to her misery. "Table 7 needs more water, Rossi, and try to look like you're not planning a funeral." The voice belonged to Marco. His own smile as synthetic as the potted orchids dotting the dining room. He was a piranha in a tailored vest, always circling, sensing weakness. Amelia forced her lips into the familiar brittle shape of a smile. "Got it, Marco." She moved through the labyrinth of tables, a ghost in a black uniform. She refilled water glasses with a steady hand. She didn't feel her mind a million miles away, crunching numbers that never added up. Rent was due. The late notice for the electricity bill was tucked under a magnet on her fridge, its red lettering a constant, screaming accusation. And then there was the biggest, heaviest number of all the cost of Lily's next round of treatment. Her sister Lily was 16. She should have been worried about prom dates and algebra exams. Instead, she was an expert on clinical trials and the efficacy of immunosuppressants. A rare degenerative autoimmune disease was methodically, cruelly dimming the bright light of her younger sister. And every smile Amelia faked, every excellent choice, sir, she uttered, was for her. Her station included table 12, tucked into a discreet alcove. It was occupied by a single diner, a man who hadn't looked at his menu once since sitting down. He wasn't scrolling on his phone or staring impatiently at the door. He was just watching the intricate ballet of the restaurant with a stillness that was unnerving. He was handsome in a severe, sculpted way. His suit was a deep charcoal grey, probably a Tom Ford tailored so perfectly it looked less like clothing and more like a second skin. A Patek Philippe watch peeked from his cuff, its quiet gleam a stark contrast to the gaudy Rolexes sported by the finance bros at table 9. When Amelia approached, he finally shifted his gaze from the room to her. His eyes were a startlingly clear shade of blue, intelligent and unnervingly perceptive. They didn't just see a waitress. They seemed to see the frayed edges of her composure, the exhaustion deep in her bones. "Are you ready to order, sir?" she asked, her voice a practiced, smooth melody. He ignored the question. "You've been here since lunch." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He had noticed. Most patrons barely noticed if their waiter was male or female, let alone if they'd been working for 10 hours straight. A knot of apprehension tightened in her stomach. Had she done something wrong? Was he a secret shopper? A critic? "We're a little short-staffed tonight, sir," she said, the lie tasting like ash. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low and resonant. "That's not what I asked. I asked if you are ready to order. But you seem distracted. Tell me." He continued, steepling his fingers, his gaze unwavering. "What is it you want more than anything else in this world?" The question was so absurd, so out of place in the transactional world of fine dining, that it short-circuited her brain. The carefully constructed wall of professional deference crumbled. All the frustration, the bone-deep weariness of the last 14 days, the crushing weight of Lily's illness, the shame of the red-lettered bill on her fridge, it all bubbled up. A sound escaped her, something between a scoff and a laugh, raw and utterly genuine. She met his intense blue eyes. Honestly, she said the word sharp with a weariness she could no longer conceal. "A day off. Just one. A day where I don't have to smile when I want to scream, where my feet don't feel like they're on fire, and where I don't have to worry if I'll have enough for the subway ride home." The confession hung in the opulent air between them. She'd said too much. Way too much. This was how you got fired. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She braced for the complaint, the curt dismissal, the call for her manager. The man didn't flinch. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. Not pity, not amusement, but something closer to recognition. He simply nodded a slow, deliberate motion. "I see," he said softly. Then he finally glanced down at the menu. "I'll have the seared scallops and a bottle of the Sancerre, the Domaine Vacheron." The rest of the meal passed in a blur of professional efficiency. Amelia served him with trembling hands, her mind replaying her outburst on a loop. She avoided his gaze, certain she would see condescension there. But he was perfectly polite, eating his meal with the same quiet intensity he did everything else. When he was finished, he didn't ask for the check. He simply placed a few crisp $100 bills on the table, more than enough to cover the meal and a generous tip. As he rose to leave, he paused beside her. "Get some rest, miss." He trailed off, realizing he didn't know her name. "Rossi," she supplied automatically, her voice barely a whisper. "Amelia Rossi." He held her gaze for a moment longer. "Amelia Rossi," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. "Good night." And then he was gone, melting into the stream of departing guests, leaving Amelia with a pounding heart, a generous tip she desperately needed, and the profound sinking feeling that she had just made the biggest mistake of her career. She wouldn't know until the sun rose the next day that it wasn't a mistake. It was a catalyst. The shrill alarm on Amelia's phone was a declaration of war. 6:00 a.m. It was a summons back to the battlefield of her life, and every morning she lost the first fight just by opening her eyes. The pre-dawn light filtering through the grimy window of her fifth-floor walk-up in Queens cast long shadows across the cramped apartment. It was a space defined by what it lacked: square footage, quiet, and hope. She shared the apartment with her best friend, Sarah, a perpetually optimistic nursing student who somehow managed to see the silver lining in New York's stormiest clouds. Sarah was already up a textbook on pharmacology propped against the sugar bowl on their tiny kitchen table. "Morning, sunshine." Sarah chirped, not looking up. "You look like you wrestled a garbage truck and lost." "Felt like it," Amelia mumbled, shuffling towards the coffee maker. Her body was a symphony of aches. The blister on her heel had burst some time in the night, and now every step was a fresh agony. Her mind was still fuzzy from a night of restless sleep, haunted by dreams of piercing blue eyes and the mortifying memory of her confession. A day off. What kind of idiot says that to a customer? A rich one at that. She half expected a call from her manager that morning telling her not to bother coming in. Ever. As she poured the life-giving black coffee into a chipped mug, she saw it. A slim black envelope lying on the worn floor mat just inside the door. It hadn't been there when she'd stumbled in at 2 a.m. It must have been slipped under the door. "What's that?" Sarah asked, finally looking up. "Probably another final notice from Con Edison, but in a fancy tuxedo." Amelia grumbled, bending down to pick it up. The envelope was made of thick, heavy cardstock that felt impossibly luxurious, like something a wedding invitation for royalty would arrive in. There was no stamp, no address, no name. Just the stark, matte black. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned it over. She slid her thumb under the flap and broke the seal. Inside there was no letter, no note. Just a single object nestled in the velvety interior. It was a card, solid black with a satisfying, cool weight to it. The information on it was embossed in silver. Her name, Amelia Rossi, was printed in clean, sharp capital letters. Below it, the iconic crest of American Express. It wasn't a gold card, or even a platinum card. It was the stuff of myth, the legendary Centurion card. The black card. Amelia stared at it, her brain refusing to compute what her eyes were seeing. This was the card they whispered about at the restaurant, the one reserved for billionaires and oligarchs, the one that supposedly had no preset spending limit. No way, Sarah breathed now, standing beside her, peering over her shoulder. Is that real? Tucked behind the card was a small, stiff piece of paper, the same quality as the envelope. On it, Beth. 5 words were typed in a simple, elegant font. You wanted a day off. Take it. Beneath the words, 2 initials, J.C. Julian Croft, the man from table 12. Amelia felt the blood drain from her face. She stumbled back and sank onto one of the wobbly kitchen chairs. The card felt like it was burning a hole in her hand. This is insane, she whispered. This is a joke. It has to be a joke. Some joke, Sarah said, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. That's an Amex Centurion. They don't just hand those out. You have to be invited. You have to spend like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just to be considered. Amelia's mind raced a frantic torrent of questions. How did he find her? She had only told him her name. Amelia Rossi. Was that all it took? For a man like that? Maybe it was. A few clicks on a keyboard, a call to a private investigator, and the entire architecture of her life would be laid bare. The thought was terrifying. It was a violation. What does he want? Amelia said, her voice trembling. People like that don't do things for free. There's always a price. Maybe he's just nice, Sarah offered weakly, though she didn't sound convinced. A secret philanthropist. Like a real-life Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne fights criminals, Sarah. He doesn't give limitless credit cards to waitresses who complain too much. This feels creepy. He found out where I live. Okay, the finding where you live part is definitely a 5-alarm fire level of creepy. Sarah conceded. But Leah, look at this. Think about what this could mean. Sarah's pragmatic nursing brain kicked in. Lily. Her medication. That experimental trial Dr. Evans mentioned, the one the insurance company won't even look at. The thought hit Amelia with the force of a physical blow. The trial. It was their last best hope. A long shot, but a shot nonetheless. The entry cost was astronomical. A figure so far beyond her reality that she couldn't even properly visualize it. But with the card in her hand, she was torn by a visceral, warring mix of emotions. Fear, suspicion, and a tiny, wild sprout of hope that she was terrified to acknowledge. The card was a key. But what door did it unlock? And what was waiting on the other side? I can't, Amelia said, shaking her head, pushing the card across the table as if it were contaminated. I can't use it. Why not? Sarah pressed her voice gentle. He said to take the day off. What if you just test it? Something small. Prove it's real. Amelia's phone buzzed. A text from Marco. Mr. Dubois is asking why you're not here yet. You're on thin ice, Rossi. Mr. Dubois was their manager, a man with the patience of a lit fuse. She was late. She should be on the subway right now, hurtling towards another day of servitude. But the black card sat on the table, a silent, powerful challenge. Take the day off. It was a dare, a temptation, a lifeline. With a surge of reckless defiance, Amelia grabbed her phone. Her thumbs flew across the screen. Feeling unwell. Won't be in today. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then she looked at Sarah, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Okay, Amelia said, her voice steadier now. Let's go test it. The first test was an act of quiet rebellion. Instead of turning right out of her apartment building towards the subway station, Amelia turned left towards the small, slightly overpriced coffee shop on the corner, the one she always walked past, but never entered. The one that sold lattes for $6, the equivalent of an hour of her take-home pay. With the black card clutched in her pocket, she walked in. The air smelled of freshly ground espresso and artisanal pastries. It was the smell of a life she observed but never participated in. I'll have a large caramel latte with oat milk and one of those almond croissants, she said to the barista, her voice barely a whisper. The total came to $11.50, a laughable sum for the piece of metal in her hand. But for her, it was a monumental indulgence. She held her breath as she slid the card into the chip reader. There was a beep, a moment of electronic silence that stretched for an eternity. Then the screen flashed. Approved. The barista handed her the receipt to sign. She scrawled Amelia Rossi on the line, her hand shaking. It was real. She and Sarah sat at a small table by the window, the latte warming Amelia's hands, the croissant flaky and buttery. It was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. But the comfort was laced with a thick thread of anxiety. So it works, Sarah said, nibbling on a piece of the croissant Amelia had offered her. Phase 1 complete. What's Phase 2? A pair of Louboutins. A shopping spree at Bergdorf's. Amelia shook her head. The thought of buying designer clothes felt frivolous, almost insulting. This isn't about me, Sarah. You know that. Her mind was on Lily. Not just the big, terrifying cost of the clinical trial, but the small things, the daily discomforts. Lily was always cold, a side effect of her condition and the medications. Her bed was old, the mattress lumpy and unsupportive. The cheap tablet she used to watch movies and read books on kept crashing, small miseries that compounded the larger one. "There's a home goods store a few blocks from here," Amelia said, a new resolve hardening her voice. "One of the fancy ones." An hour later, they were walking through the hushed aisles of restoration hardware. The place was less a store and more a museum of domestic perfection. Amelia, in her worn jeans and faded hoodie, felt like an imposter. A sales associate with an impeccably knotted scarf eyed her with thinly veiled suspicion. Ignoring him, Amelia marched towards the bedding section. She found the heaviest, softest cashmere blanket she had ever touched. It was the color of cream and felt like a cloud. The price tag read $1,800. Her stomach lurched. It was more than a month's rent. She grabbed it. Next, she found an adjustable bed, the kind used in hospitals, but with the luxurious facade of high-end furniture. It could be raised and lowered with a remote allowing Lily to sit up or lie down without straining herself. Price $7,500. She added it to the order, then to the electronics department of a nearby Best Buy. The newest top-of-the-line iPad Pro with the largest screen, a pair of noise-cancelling headphones to block out the world when she felt overwhelmed, a subscription to every streaming service imaginable. With every purchase, the knot of fear in her stomach twisted tighter, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, protective love for her sister. This wasn't a shopping spree. This was an arsenal. These were weapons to fight a war of attrition against Lily's disease, to buy her moments of comfort and peace. The final and most terrifying step was the call. She had the number for the administrative coordinator of the clinical trial at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Dr. Evans had given it to her months ago, a gesture of hope that had felt more like a cruelty at the time. Sitting on a bench in Central Park with Sarah holding her hand, Amelia dialed the number. "Yes, I'm calling to inquire about the autoimmune research trial under Dr. Aris Thorne." Amelia said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'd like to secure a place for my sister, Lillian Rossi." Certainly the woman on the other end said, her tone professional and detached. "You're aware of the initial deposit required to begin the assessment and reserve a spot, correct? It's a non-refundable payment of $50,000. $50,000. The number hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from her lungs. It was an impossible sum, a king's ransom. Amelia looked at the black card in her other hand. It wasn't just a piece of plastic and metal anymore. It was a dragon's hoard, a genie's lamp. It was hope. "Yes," Amelia said, her voice clear and firm. "I'm aware. I'd like to make the payment now." She read out the 16 digits, the expiration date, and the security code. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening as the payment was processed. Amelia thought she might pass out. "All right, Miss Rossi," the coordinator said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "The payment has been approved. We'll schedule Lillian's initial consultation for next week. We'll be in touch." The call ended. Amelia's hand dropped. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. They weren't tears of fear anymore. They were tears of profound, earth-shattering relief. She had done it. She had bought her sister a chance. But miles away, in a sleek, minimalist office overlooking the city, a man was watching. Julian Croft sat at a massive desk made of polished obsidian. On a large monitor, a list of transactions was updating in real time. The Coffee Beanery, $11.50. Restoration Hardware, $9,300. Best Buy, $2,150. Memorial Sloan Kettering, $50,000. His assistant, a severe-looking woman named Evelyn, stood silently by the desk. No designer clothes, no five-star hotels, no frivolous purchases. Evelyn observed, her tone neutral. Coffee comfort for another, and a Hail Mary for her sister. She's not what we expected. Julian didn't answer immediately. He stared at the last transaction. Memorial Sloan Kettering. He zoomed in on the details of the payment, cross-referencing it with the information his team had gathered on Amelia Rossi overnight. A file on her sister Lillian was open on a separate screen, detailing her medical history. He leaned back in his chair, a strange, complicated expression on his face. He had set a test expecting to see human nature in its most predictable form, greed. He had expected a shopping spree on Fifth Avenue, a first-class ticket to somewhere exotic. He had expected to be disappointed. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected a desperate tactical strike against a family tragedy. He had given her a day off, and she had used it to go to war. "No, Julian," said his voice, quiet. "She isn't." He had started this as an impersonal gesture, a way to soothe a ghost from his own past. But the girl's name, Rossi, had been a hook. Now, seeing her choices, seeing the name of that specific hospital, that specific clinical trial, it was becoming something else entirely. Something far more personal and dangerous. "Evelyn," he said, his eyes fixed on the screen. "I want to know everything about that clinical trial. Who funds it? Who runs it? Everything." He had a feeling, a cold, sinking premonition, that he already knew the answer. The new bed and the mountain of expensive gifts arrived at the apartment that evening. The delivery men, accustomed to hauling luxury goods to Park Avenue penthouses, were visibly confused by the fifth-floor walk-up and the narrow, creaking staircase. When Lily saw the adjustable bed, the cashmere blanket, and the new iPad, her eyes, usually clouded with pain and fatigue, lit up with a brilliance Amelia hadn't seen in years. She didn't ask where it came from. In the pure, unadulterated joy of the moment, the how didn't matter. Seeing her sister comfortable, propped up on plush pillows wrapped in impossible softness and giggling at a movie on a crystal-clear screen that was worth all the fear and anxiety. For the first time in a long time, their tiny apartment felt less like a coup and more like a sanctuary. But the real world, with all its sharp edges, could not be kept at bay for long. The next day, Amelia returned to Le Cirque. Walking into the restaurant was like stepping into a different reality. The bubble of hope she had carefully constructed over the last 36 hours burst the moment she saw Marco's sneering face. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in," he said, blocking her path to the locker room. "Feeling better?" "You must be. I saw a delivery truck from Restoration Hardware outside your building yesterday. Must be a nasty flu that can only be cured with a $10,000 shopping spree." Amelia's blood ran cold. He had seen. Of course he had. Marco missed nothing, especially when it came to the misfortunes or fortunes of others. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to push past him. "Oh, I think you do." He hissed, his voice low and venomous. "We all heard about your little chat with Mr. Croft the other night. Funny how you take one sick day and suddenly you're redecorating. You're a fast worker, Rossi, I'll give you that." The poison in his words dripped into the air. The rumor mill had already been churning. Her sudden, unexplained absence, coupled with Marco's carefully planted seeds of gossip, had created a narrative. Amelia Rossi, the poor waitress, had seduced a rich patron. She was a gold digger, a schemer. The change in atmosphere was palpable. Her few work friends suddenly found their shoes fascinating when she approached. Her orders were accidentally misplaced. Mr. Dubois, the manager, watched her with narrowed, suspicious eyes. She was an outcast. The day was a special kind of hell. Every condescending glance, every whispered comment felt like a small cut. The physical exhaustion she was used to was replaced by a deep emotional weariness. The joy she had felt seeing Lily's happiness began to feel tainted, bought at the price of her own reputation. The final straw came during the dinner rush. Amelia was carrying a heavy tray laden with the main course for a table of 6, a rack of lamb, several plates of Chateaubriand, and intricate side dishes. It was a precarious, heavy load. As she navigated a narrow passage near the kitchen doors, Marco came rushing out, not looking where he was going. He bumped into her hard. It might have been an accident, but the smirk on his face as he stumbled back told her it wasn't. The tray tilted violently. Amelia fought to regain her balance, her muscles screaming in protest. For a heart-stopping second, she thought she had it. But it was too much. The entire tray went crashing to the floor in a cacophony of shattering porcelain and splattering sauce. The dining room fell silent. Every head turned. Mr. Dubois was at her side in an instant, his face a mask of purple fury. "Rossi, my office." "Now." She stood amidst the wreckage, her uniform splattered with béarnaise sauce, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Marco stood nearby, a picture of false concern. "Amelia, are you okay? You just tripped out of nowhere." In Mr. Dubois's office there was no trial. She was judge, jury, and executioner. "This is the 3rd complaint about you this week, Rossi," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Your head is not in the game. You've become a liability. First the unexplained absence, now this. Le Cirque has standards. You are no longer meeting them." "It wasn't my fault," Amelia pleaded, her voice cracking. Marco is my best waiter." Dubois cut her off coldly. "You, on the other hand, have become a distraction. Clean out your locker. You're finished." It was over. Just like that. The job she hated, the job that was slowly killing her, was gone. And with it, her only source of legitimate income. The panic was immediate and suffocating. The black card was a temporary miracle, but it wasn't a job. It wasn't a future. It was a mystery, a dangerous gift from a man she didn't know. And now she had nothing else. She walked out of the restaurant in a daze, clutching a small box with her personal belongings. She didn't take the subway. She just walked block after block, the city lights blurring through her tears. Meanwhile, in his sky-high office, Julian Croft received an update. Not from the restaurant, but from his own far more efficient sources. Amelia Rossi was terminated from her position at Le Cirque approximately 30 minutes ago, Evelyn stated, reading from a tablet. Allegedly for incompetence. However, our review of the restaurant's internal security footage of the incident suggests she was deliberately tripped by a co-worker, a Mr. Marco Bianchi. Julian's jaw tightened. He swiveled his chair to face the vast window, the glittering tapestry of New York spread out beneath him. He had given her the means to escape her trap, but in doing so he had inadvertently sprung another one. He had made her a target. And the clinical trial, Julian asked, his voice low. Evelyn's expression was grim. "That's the more Complicated news. I have the information you requested on the funding for Dr. Thorne's research. She paused. The primary benefactor, the entity that provides over 80% of its funding, is a private philanthropic organization, the Croft Foundation. Julian closed his eyes. So it was true. His foundation, the one he had established years ago to fund cutting-edge medical research, a sterile, tax-deductible endeavor he managed from a distance, was the very thing this girl was now pinning all her hopes on. He had unknowingly created the lock, and by giving her the card, had handed her the key. This was no longer a simple matter of atonement for a past sin against her father. This was a tangled, messy, present-day dilemma. His money filtered through his foundation was funding the trial. His personal money, given on a whim, was paying the entry fee. He was on both sides of the transaction, an invisible puppet master pulling strings he hadn't even known he held. He thought of the girl, fiery and exhausted, telling him she just wanted a day off. He thought of her being fired, humiliated, because of a gift he had given her. A profound, unsettling sense of responsibility settled over him. This had gone too far to remain an anonymous game. "Evelyn," he said, turning back from the window, his blue eyes sharp and decisive. "Arrange a meeting. Find out where she is right now. I'm going to go see her. It's time we spoke, face to face." Amelia ended up at the only place that felt like a sanctuary, the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge in the park overlooking the East River. The night air was cool, and the rhythmic hum of traffic overhead was a soothing, impersonal sound. She sat on a cold bench, the box of her meager belongings on the ground beside her, and watched the lights of Manhattan glitter like a cruel, broken promise. She was so lost in her own misery that she didn't hear the footsteps approach until a shadow fell over her. Miss Rosie. The voice was unmistakable, low, calm, and resonant. She looked up, startled, into the piercing blue eyes of Julian Croft. He wasn't wearing his immaculate Tom Ford suit now. He was dressed in dark jeans, a simple grey cashmere sweater, and a tailored black coat. He looked younger, less like a corporate titan, and more like a man. But his presence was just as commanding. "What do you want?" Amelia asked, her voice raspy, with shed and unshed tears. She scrambled to her feet, instinctively clutching her box of belongings like a shield. "Have you come to see the results of your little experiment?" "Well, here it is. I got a day off. I also got fired. Congratulations. I hope you were entertained." Her words were sharp, fueled by anger and humiliation. He was the cause of all this, the catalyst for the destruction of her life. Julian didn't react to her outburst. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I heard what happened at the restaurant," he said calmly. "I know it wasn't your fault." "Oh, you know, do you?" She shot back, a bitter laugh escaping her. "How do you have spies in the kitchen? Do you have a live feed of my pathetic life? You watch for fun." "I have resources," he stated simply, neither confirming nor denying. "The man who tripped you, Marco Bianchi, will be seeking new employment tomorrow, as will your former manager, Mr. Dubois." Amelia stared at him, speechless. The sheer casual power in that statement was staggering. He could ruin lives with a single quiet command. It was terrifying. Why she finally managed to ask. "Why are you doing this?" "The card. This cleaning up. What is the price?" "No one does something like this for nothing." "Do you expect me to sleep with you? Is that it? Because let me tell you right now, I'm not for sale." For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his face. It looked like regret. No. Amelia. He said, his voice softer now. He used her first name, and the sound of it from his lips sent a strange shiver through her. That is not and was never my intention. My motives are complicated. He gestured to the bench. May I warily? She sat down on the far end. He took a seat on the other, maintaining a respectful distance. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the chasm between their two worlds, stretching between them. The card, he began, looking out at the water. I want you to keep it. I want you to use it for whatever you and your sister need. Consider it a grant, with no expectation of repayment. A grant for what? For being a charity case you happened to notice. The bitterness was still there, a protective shell around her pride. No, he said finally, turning to look at her directly. His gaze was intense, searching. As restitution. Restitution. Amelia was confused. For what? A ruined dinner. A lost job. For something that happened a long time ago. For your father. The name hit her like a physical blow. Her father. He had died 5 years ago. A brilliant, gentle man who had withered into a shadow of his former self after losing his job. A man broken by a professional scandal she never fully understood. My father, she whispered. You knew my father, I did, Julian said, his voice heavy with a weight that seemed decades old. His name was Antonio Rossi. He was a gifted software engineer, one of the most brilliant I've ever met. And he worked for my first company, a small tech startup called Innovate Dynamics, long before all of this. He gestured vaguely as if to encompass the glittering skyline and the immense wealth it represented. Amelia's mind reeled. She remembered that name. Innovate Dynamics. Her father had poured his heart and soul into that company. He'd come home late, his eyes shining with excitement about the projects he was working on. And then one day, it had all stopped. He was fired, accused of stealing proprietary code. There was a lawsuit. They lost everything. Her father was blacklisted, unable to find work in his field again. The shame and stress had eaten away at him, contributing to the heart attack that eventually took his life. You were there, she asked, her voice trembling. I was the one who founded the company, Julian said, his voice laced with a self-loathing that stunned her. And I was the one who stood by and let my business partner, a man named Richard Pierce, accuse him. I was young, ambitious, and I was a coward. I knew deep down that Antonio was innocent. Pierce was the one stealing the code to sell to a competitor, and he used your father as a scapegoat. But I was afraid to challenge him, afraid of losing the company I had built. So I said nothing. The entire world seemed to tilt on its axis. This man, this billionaire, who had seemed like a creature from another planet, was a ghost from her family's past. He wasn't a random benefactor. He was the source of their ruin, the architect of her father's pain. The anger that rose in her was pure and hot and righteous. You coward. She breathed the words, dripping with contempt. She shot to her feet, her whole body shaking with rage. You stood by. You said nothing. My father lost everything because of you. His career, his reputation, his health. He died believing he was a failure because of a lie you were too weak to stop. She wanted to hit him, to scream at him, to inflict some fraction of the pain her family had endured. The black card, the money, the gifts for Lily. It all felt like blood money, now a pathetic attempt to wash his hands of a crime he had committed through his silence. "You can't buy your way out of this," she seethed, pulling the Centurion card from her pocket and throwing it at him. It clattered onto the pavement between them. "Take your damn money. We don't want it. We don't want anything from you." Julian didn't even look at the card. He just looked at her, his face a mask of weary acceptance, as if he had expected and deserved every word of her fury. "I know," he said quietly, "but your sister's clinical trial, the one you paid the deposit for, the Croft Foundation is its primary sponsor. If you reject my help, you may be rejecting her best chance." It was a checkmate. A cruel, devastatingly effective move that trapped her completely. He had woven a web so intricate, so encompassing, that to fight him was to fight for her sister's life. Amelia stood there, shaking tears of rage and helplessness, streaming down her face. She was caught, utterly and completely caught in the web of Julian Croft's guilt. The revelation hung in the cold night air, as stark and unforgiving as the steel girders of the bridge above them. Julian Croft wasn't just a man. He was a living embodiment of her family's ghost story, the faceless villain who had always lurked in the periphery of their tragedy. Amelia's rage was a wildfire, but his last words were a splash of ice-cold water, extinguishing the flames and leaving behind a chilling, painful clarity. Her sister's best chance. He had linked his atonement directly to Lily's survival. It was a masterful, cruel strategy, whether intentional or not. "You did that on purpose," she accused, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous tremor. "You researched my family, found our weak spot, and targeted it. You funded that trial knowing I would eventually be led to it. This whole thing, the restaurant, the question, the card, it was all a setup." Julian finally bent down and picked up the Centurion card from the pavement. He held it not like a key to infinite wealth, but like a piece of evidence from a crime scene. "No," he said, his voice raw, with an earnestness that was hard to disbelieve. "I swear to you that part was a coincidence. A terrible cosmic one, but a coincidence nonetheless. My foundation funds dozens of medical research projects. I manage the portfolio, not the individual patient lists. When I saw the transaction for Sloan Kettering on your account, I had my team look into it. It was only then that I made the connection." He took a step towards her, but stopped when she flinched back. "Amelia, when I saw you in the restaurant, I recognized your name. Rossi. It stuck with me all these years. I saw the same fire in your eyes that your father had. But I also saw that it was being suffocated by exhaustion. Asking you what you wanted, it was an impulse, a selfish one. I wanted to see if I could, in some small, anonymous way, alleviate a burden that I helped create. It was never meant to become this. I never meant to intrude on your life." His confession was a torrent, the words of a man who had clearly rehearsed this speech in the lonely boardrooms of his mind for years. He spoke of her father Antonio with a reverence that pained her. He described his brilliance, his infectious passion for coding, the way he could solve complex problems with elegant, simple solutions. He painted a picture of a man she had only known in his later broken years. "Richard Pierce. My partner was a shark." Julian continued, his gaze distant, lost in the past. "He saw your father's talent not as an asset to the company, but as a threat to his own mediocrity." When a major competitor approached Pierce to buy our core algorithm, he saw a way to get rich and eliminate a rival in one move. He framed your father, created a mountain of false evidence. I was 26 years old. The company was my entire world. Pierce threatened to dissolve it and sue me if I contested the story. I was a coward. It is the single greatest regret of my life. He explained that Pierce had eventually been caught for similar crimes years later, but by then Innovate Dynamics was long gone, and the damage to Antonio Rossi's life was irreversible. Julian had gone on to found Aura Dynamics, the multi-billion-dollar behemoth he now commanded, but the success had always felt hollow, built on the foundation of that first critical failure of character. Amelia sank back onto the bench, her legs unable to support the weight of this new history. Her entire narrative had been wrong. Her father wasn't a failure. He was a victim. This stranger, this billionaire, wasn't a predator. He was a penitent. Why now, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why, after all these years, I've tried to find your family before he admitted. But you moved after your father passed, and your mother, she changed her name back to her maiden name. You disappeared, until I walked into Le Cirque for a meaningless business dinner I didn't want to be at, and I saw a waitress with the name Rossi on her tag. He shook his head, a wry, humorless smile touching his lips. It seems fate, or whatever you want to call it, has a flair for the dramatic. She looked at the man before her, truly looked at him. She saw the lines of sleeplessness around his eyes, the profound loneliness in his posture. He was encased in wealth, but he was a prisoner of his own past. His guilt was a cage as real as her poverty had been. The black card lay on the bench between them. It was no longer a symbol of his power or her temptation. It was a bridge, a dark, complicated, and deeply flawed bridge between their two broken worlds. It was blood money, yes, but it was also the only medicine that could save her sister. Her pride screamed at her to run, to maintain the pure, righteous anger she was entitled to. But the image of Lily laughing in her new, comfortable bed was stronger. The thought of the clinical trial of real hope was a gravitational pull she could not escape. To accept his help was to forgive him in a way. It was to become complicit in his act of atonement. It meant letting go of the simple black and white story of victimhood and stepping into a future that was messy, morally grey, and inextricably linked to him. With a trembling hand, Amelia reached out and took the card from the bench. Her fingers brushed against his as she picked it up. The brief contact was electric, a jolt of shared history, of shared pain. "This doesn't mean I forgive you," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, she wasn't looking at a billionaire or a villain. She was looking at Julian. "This is for Lily. The terms of this arrangement are that you will fund whatever she needs. The trial, the aftercare, everything. No limits, no questions asked." He nodded, his relief so profound it was almost a visible thing. "Anything, whatever it takes," and in return she continued, her voice gaining strength. "You will tell me everything about my father. The projects he worked on, the things he created. I want to know the man you knew, not the ghost that you helped create." A single tear traced a path down Julian's cheek, a startling crack in his formidable composure. "That is the easiest term I will ever agree to," he whispered. It was not a fairy tale ending. It was a complicated, painful negotiation, a treaty signed on a cold park bench in the middle of the night. But it was in its own way a beginning. The weeks that followed were a surreal blend of grief and hope of past and present. The black card became a tool not for luxury, but for life. Amelia orchestrated Lily's entry into the clinical trial with the efficiency of a seasoned general. There were consultations with the country's top specialists, flights to clinics for preliminary tests, and a small sunny apartment rented near the hospital to make the treatments less grueling. The money removed every logistical obstacle, allowing Amelia to focus on the only thing that mattered Lily. Julian kept his word. He was a ghost in the machine, his influence felt but rarely seen. Bills were paid, appointments were secured, and the best of everything was made available, all with a quiet, seamless efficiency. He did not intrude, but he also kept his other promise. Once a week they would meet, sometimes in a quiet corner of a museum, sometimes on a ferry crossing the Hudson once, even in the soaring, silent halls of the New York Public Library. And he would talk about her father. He brought old design documents, schematics for code that Amelia didn't understand, but could see the beauty and elegance in. He told her stories of Antonio Rossi's frustrating genius, his terrible taste in coffee, his booming laugh that would echo through the office when he finally cracked a difficult problem. Julian didn't just give her facts. He gave her back the father she had lost twice, once to disgrace and once to death. He was rebuilding him in her memory, replacing the image of a broken man with that of a brilliant creator. During these meetings, a strange, tentative connection formed between them. She saw past the billionaire and saw the lonely man still haunted by a 26-year-old's mistake. He saw past the weary waitress and saw the fierce, resilient woman who was her father's daughter. They never spoke of the money or of the future. They spoke only of the past, and in doing so they began to lay a foundation for something new. Amelia found she no longer thought of the money as a handout. It was a debt. It was her father's stolen legacy, being repaid not to her, but through her. She was the steward of his restitution, and her purpose was to channel it into creating a future he was denied. One crisp autumn afternoon, about 2 months after that night in the park, Amelia received a call from Dr. Thorne. Lily was responding to the treatment. The markers in her blood work were improving dramatically. It wasn't a cure, not yet, but it was the most positive prognosis she had ever been given. It was a miracle. After the call, Amelia didn't text Julian. She walked to the headquarters of Aura Dynamics, a gleaming spear of glass and steel that pierced the Manhattan sky. She didn't have an appointment, but when she gave her name, the formidable wall of security melted away. She was escorted to the top floor. Julian was standing by the window of his office, the same view he'd had the night she was fired. He turned as she entered, a question in his eyes. She didn't have to say a word. He saw it on her face. "It's working," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "The treatment. It's working." He closed his eyes for a moment, a wave of profound relief washing over his features. "Thank you for telling me in person," he said. "I realized something today." Amelia went on, feeling a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. "For my whole life, I've been trying to survive. But that's not enough. I want to build something, the way my father did." She walked closer to his desk. "I don't want to be a waitress anymore. I don't want to just spend this money. I want to learn. I want to finish the college degree I had to abandon. I want to understand business foundations the way this world you live in actually works. I want you to teach me." It wasn't a plea, it was a demand, a new term of engagement. She was no longer the recipient of his charity. She was claiming her seat at the table. A slow smile spread across Julian's face, a genuine smile that reached his piercing blue eyes and transformed him completely. He saw her not as the daughter of the man he had wronged, but as his equal, a partner. I think Julian Croft said that can be arranged. Her day off had ended long ago. But for the first time, standing there in the sky-high office of the man who had ruined her past and just saved her future, Amelia Rossi felt like her life was just beginning. That single joke, born from a moment of pure exhaustion, didn't just lead to a day off. It unraveled a history of secrets, lies, and a debt that spanned decades. Amelia's story isn't just about a waitress and a billionaire. It's about how a single act of kindness, however complicated, can rewrite a person's destiny. It shows us that sometimes the greatest windfalls aren't about limitless money, but about finding truth, reclaiming a stolen legacy, and being given the chance to build a future you thought was impossible. Her journey from servitude to stewardship reminds us that our past doesn't have to be our prison, and that a new beginning can be negotiated even in the face of impossible odds. If Amelia's incredible story of loss, luck, and redemption moved you, please give this video a like. It truly helps our channel grow. Don't forget to share it with someone who loves a story of resilience. And most importantly, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next real-life drama. What would you have done with the black card? Let us know in the comments below.